Welcome to Connection Academy podcast, a series of conversations on what success might look like in a truly connected world. One where we have a better understanding of ourselves, each other, and the endless possibilities of life around us. I'm your host, Kristen Ransom. On today's episode, I speak with Thabo Lepotho, who is a counsellor for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, Africa's largest mental health organisation. Today's conversation is about how we can use self-awareness to address our mental well-being.
Reflection is super important. It's your window. It's your window to your own soul. People that don't reflect, you see that they have insecurities. People that don't reflect are more likely to not have a good view, or rather a good relationship with themselves. And when they don't have a good relationship with themselves, they don't have a good relationship with other people. You need to be more confident about your own self-image for you to be able to break the chain or break the cycle of trauma. It's for you to actually look at yourself and start looking at, what have I learned?
When it comes to our mental well-being, self-awareness is crucial, as it makes it easier to identify what triggers us, to anticipate our own reactions, and importantly, to make behavioral changes that can lead to greater personal and interpersonal success. With that being said, lean in and enjoy.
My name is Thabo. I'm a lay counsellor at an organization that is called the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. So my work is mainly to help people by counseling them. Prior to the COVID pandemic, I would do school talks where I would go and talk about mental health to school kids. I also did corporate talks whereby I would go to certain organizations or other corporations where I would give mental health education. And amongst other things, I also did radio interviews to assist now a wider community in terms of how to deal with, mental health illnesses and how to assist other people that are at home who may be experiencing mental health illnesses. So yeah, in short, that is what Thabo does, and that is Thabo.
Wow, Thabo is inspiring, and I think that's so amazing. I can just hear that you are passionate about educating people on this very important topic.
I'm always passionate about it.
So today we're chatting about our ability to use self-awareness to address emotional and psychological trauma. So I thought a good place to start would be to actually define what emotional and psychological trauma is. So I turned to Google and this is what I found. It says here, emotional and psychological trauma is the result of extraordinarily stressful events that shatter your sense of security, making you feel helpless in a dangerous world. Psychological trauma can leave you struggling with upsetting emotions, memories, and anxiety that won't go away. It can leave you feeling numb, disconnected, and unable to trust other people. Thabo, I wonder if you could expand upon this definition. Trauma is something that most of us are likely to go through in our lives if we have not already. And I can't help but feel inspired by the fact that we can and we are empowered to address our trauma with the effective use of self-awareness.
The one issue that many people would experience, everything that happens in our lives leaves an impact, no matter how small it is. One thing that I can then bring to light is that let's rather talk of something that are taken as trivial, such as bullying. Bullying in many cases is not something that people talk about. However, it affects the person psychologically and emotionally as well, right? And its effects only start to show themselves later on in life. And the way that they show themselves, in many cases, it's through insecurity. You feel insecure about yourself, you feel insecure about your body, you feel insecure about your image. Many people don't deal with these. Many people don't even take time to sort of like to process some of these things that they've been told as kids, probably as teenagers, And in some other cases, as young adults, later on in life, this person starts to have a lot of, self-image issues. They always seek validation. And in some other cases, when it then comes into those people's relationships, everything that is said to them, sometimes it doesn't, because you can't recognize what this person is saying to you, because initially you don't have that relationship with yourself. So whenever you are supposed to sort of like have a relationship with yourself, that whole connection is never there. No matter how insignificant that you may think having a relationship with yourself is, but it's the most important and fundamental thing that you can have, or rather, it's the most fundamental relationship for you to be introduced to other relationships. Because if I don't love myself, how can I love other people? The second thing is that it then goes further to affect us in our workplace. I do something that is very well, very good. However, I'll still need my boss to give me those thumbs up. In some other cases, you find that even when you are given thumbs up, you still feel like your work is insignificant. And we don't notice these things, or rather, we don't pay attention to these things, because sometimes it is maybe, just maybe, the reason for that is because we went through small significant things, but we still thought that they are not. So the long-term effect is that the way that you start to perceive yourself changes drastically. And not only that, the things that we think are insignificant are the ones that actually hurt us the most. Like I said, if you take what I told you about our phones, we take like a dozen pictures, and some of those pictures we feel that they don't have any significant emotional, whatever. But later on in life, when you start going back to those pictures, or rather you start saying, hey, I am having issues with my space, you normally go for the pictures that you took like 3 years ago, and you find that they actually occupy like a huge sum of space. Those pictures that you thought were insignificant are actually the ones that actually occupy a lot of space. And when you start to take them as a sum, you may find that probably, let's just say you're about to delete 1,000 pictures. And when you look at how much space they were consuming, you find that they were actually taking about 3 gigs of your space. That's how things are. And that's how you'd actually realize that, okay, no matter how small something is, when put together, it actually makes a huge difference. So I'd go as far as saying someone who has said to them, you are not worthy, and they didn't take that lightly. Or, someone who has found themselves failing a test that they thought probably they are going to pass, and, feel like, I'll do better next time. All of those things, they eat up on your own confidence. Because at the end of the day, if I fail that very same test again, you're going to start feeling that maybe I'm not cut out for this thing, but only to find out that no, it's not about you passing or failing, but it's a matter of probably how you're processing the information, and you just have to change. So the one thing that makes it nicer when we process all those things that we go through, or when we start dealing with those small insignificant things that we feel are insignificant, is that once we start doing that, you learn from those things. You need to learn from those traumatic experiences. Hence, it is so important that even the most insignificant things that you go through, you just take some time to sort of like process it, look at what is it that, or how is it affecting you, and moving forward, then what do? You learn from it. That's what's important. But unfortunately, we're not taught how to do that, because we live in such a fast-paced life that you go through one traumatic event to another traumatic event to another traumatic event, and there is no sort of like a time or space whereby you just get a moment whereby you can be with yourself, to breathe, to collect yourself, and then move on, knowing that I've dealt with whatever it is that I've went through peacefully and gracefully.
Yeah, you've mentioned a few points that I'd like to tap on there. I think the first thing that you mentioned was the importance of self-awareness in addressing trauma. I read something that said, as long as we are holding on to trauma, we are viewing life through a very distorted lens. And you mentioned
Yes.
there how, if you receive an insult, perhaps you go through a breakup, maybe somebody you love passes away. All of these events that cause trauma in our lives, we kind of store on the inside, and it affects the way we perceive what's on the outside. Sometimes we don't think that we are unnaturally scared. We just think that everything is terrifying. Or we don't notice that we've got an appallingly low sense of self-worth. We might just think that everyone dislikes us. And so on. And it's as you've said, it's often because of the trauma that we are holding onto on the inside that is affecting the way that we perceive life around us. So my question then to you on this point is, because self-awareness is so important, what would it look like to really become a bit more aware in terms of what traumas we are holding onto and storing? What kind of questions could we ask ourselves to really take the first step in addressing our trauma?
There is nothing that is as honest as the mirror. There's nothing that is as honest as the mirror. So the mirror will always tell you what what you want to see. If you want to see beauty, your mirror is actually going to show you beauty. If you want to see hurt, your mirror is actually going to give you that. When you see ugly, your mirror is actually going to also show you or give you ugly. The first thing that we need to start with, self-awareness is anchored in reflection. If you don't reflect, you won't be self-aware. And reflection, like I said, is more like looking at yourself in the mirror. And if you see someone who is hurt, that is how and what you will always feel constantly. I remember when I was a like a teenager. I was once a bullied, by the way. I was once bullied when I was in primary, and 2 years in high school. I was once bullied. So I had to teach myself, because the bullying that happened was more psychological, right? Someone then decided to say that I'm not handsome. Someone then decided to say I won't be loved, right? So I carried that whole thing into my high school. And because of that, those effects actually started or lasted for about 4 years. I mean, no, not even 4 years. But when I went into high school, I still carried that, right? But then I had to take a conscious decision to say that I need to start teaching myself on how to treat myself. I used to wake up in the morning before I go to school. I'd look at myself in the mirror and I'd tell myself in the mirror what I want to see. I did that, I think, for almost about a period of 10 years, where I went from one transition to the next. And how the transitions went, it was in this way. I started off by looking at myself in the mirror, saying all those nice things to myself. And then moving forward, I then started to read more things that had to do with being positive. I'd read nice quotes that would talk about positivity. And from that, I then started going to the gym. There was a certain image that I wanted to fit in, a certain image that I felt comfortable being in. I wasn't going to start this process. And by the way, I only started to notice how much impact this has had in my life, that switch. I only started to believe in myself when I was in varsity. And that was, I started varsity 5 years after finishing high school. And I started this practice when I was doing grade 9. I only started to understand that, oh my goodness, I've actually changed. My confidence is on par with my own image, as in like the way I look at myself. I had to start somewhere and I had to reflect. So if we don't reflect and we don't do such self-introspection, you won't get to a point whereby you actually start believing in what you see, and you sort of like come out of the shell of trauma. Because trauma, it's more like there's a cycle that it keeps on feeding itself, and it's a toxic cycle. So you have to break the cycle, but introducing something that is more positive. So that's what's important about self-reflection, because immediately once you start to reflect and you look at yourself, and you don't just look at yourself in a way of, in a subjective way, you also have to be objective to say that, is this good for me or is this not good for me? How is this good for me? If I were someone else, how would I feel about this? It's more of you being objective and then coming back and being subjective. So you have to balance all of these things. But what has to come out of this is that you need to be more confident about your own self-image for you to be able to sort of like to break the chain or break the cycle of trauma.
And to really unravel what it might be that affected you in the first place.
Exactly. So you won't be able to see that if you don't reflect. Reflection is super important. It's like it's your window. It's your window to your own soul. And I promise you, in many cases, people that don't reflect, in many cases, people that don't reflect are more likely to not have a good view, or rather a good relationship with themselves. And when they don't have a good relationship with themselves, they don't have a good relationship with other people. And in many cases, people that don't reflect, you see that they have insecurities, and they always feel that the insecurities are brought up by the other person, or brought probably by the boyfriend, or probably by the friend, or probably about a certain, or your job, or whatever. But what they don't understand is that insecurities reflect our own issues. That's all they are. It's not someone else's issues, but they reflect us. It means that I have certain things that are weighing heavy on me that I've never dealt with, and they always come out as what? As a form of insecurity. That's what usually happens.
I'm very interested just listening to you speak on this. It's super interesting. I definitely agree with you on the fact that reflection is so important. I mean, I kind of think about it like this. We spend our lives observing and experiencing things, and that's almost like we're gathering data, right? All that data is sitting in our minds and within us. And if we're not reflecting, we're never taking the time to look at what that data has actually stored and how it can guide us to a life that we would be happy living. Um, and and I think what trauma might be is parts of that data that don't necessarily match our expectations, or might have been an abnormal event that caused us hurt, and then had all these knock-on effects that you've mentioned: isolation, fear, insecurity, etc. I definitely agree that reflecting on our personal life experiences is incredibly important, but I want to acknowledge that it is also quite difficult, especially depending on the reason why someone has experienced trauma. You know, it takes a lot of courage to reflect. And I think it might be something that's a bottleneck in terms of why people don't do it, because they don't want to revisit those horrible traumatic times that they've lived through. What advice would you give to someone who might be struggling with taking this step to perhaps go back there and deal with it, look it in the eye and unravel it so that they can move forward?
One way or another, whether you like it or you don't, you are reflecting. And the way that you do it sometimes, especially when it comes to trauma makes you think of one thing over and over and over and over again. And the more that you think about this thing, it's the more that you find yourself falling deeper, into a state of trauma again. And the more that you fall even deeper, it's the more that you find yourself being very, very anxious, right? And like I said, it's a very toxic and disturbing cycle, where everything about your life revolves around this one event. Everything about it. You can't do anything, in your life without actually thinking of how much hurt you are. Or you can't, live your life without thinking about what that accident has done to you. You can't live your life without actually thinking about how much you miss probably your grandfather, and probably how he or she died, or whoever it is in your family that has died. So you spend so much of your time thinking and thinking about this, to a point whereby you actually don't, you don't function. Like I said, the thing about trauma or psychological illnesses is that you get to a point whereby you're not functioning, you're not yourself, you don't become the person that you normally were, right? You're no longer chilling with your friends, you're no longer chilling with your family. The isolation where it comes in, you don't feel like going to work, you don't feel like getting up and eating, right? So this cycle, the way that it goes, it's sort of like each event, or rather each symptom, feeds on the next. So if you're not eating, you won't feel the energy to to do certain things. And now if you're not doing certain things, you sort of like feel despondent about your whole life. And when you feel that way, it takes you back to this traumatic experience to say that maybe this was supposed to happen for a reason, and maybe that is why I didn't die. I'm supposed to die and whatever. So it's sort of like a cycle that feeds on itself. And the only way that you can then break this cycle is for you to actually look at yourself and start looking at, what have I learned? I always say to people that, you know, I have friends who come to talk to me and be like, you know what, this happened and this happened. I feel this way, I feel that way. This is what is happening in my life right now. I always ask, what have you learned? Because the importance of you knowing what you've learned is actually you reflecting. Because sometimes when you say reflect to people, like you said, it's the most sort of like uncomfortable question ever. And not only is it uncomfortable, but how do I even start to reflect? Well, you need to start by looking at what lesson you were supposed to get from whatever it is that happened to you, right? You got mugged. What have I learned from getting mugged is that maybe from now on I need to carry a taser or a pepper spray. I've learned that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to walk in this particular passage because it is dark and I was alone. Maybe sometimes the next time I should actually walk with other people. So I have reflected, and not only have I reflected, but I had a sense of empowerment in my reflection, because now I know that I would A, carry a taser or a pepper spray, B, I'm not going to walk alone if I'm going to go through this passage. I will actually have 2 or 3 friends who are going to accompany me or who are going to walk with me. Other than that, I'm not going to go through this passage. So I then start to learn all of these new things and all of these different things that are going to sort of like empower me and actually move me from this traumatic experience. Because the more that I talk about this, and not only talk about it, but also express how I feel. Remember that in me reflecting, I also have to express how I feel. I can't just say I've learned. What have you learned? What is it that you're learning from this? And this is where the expression comes in. So the more that you express and you talk about this traumatic experience or traumatic event, it's the more that you actually start to get all of these different thoughts that are going to empower you with knowledge that is actually going to make you more smarter and wiser. When you start reflecting, remember to learn. What are you learning? What was the lesson? And immediately once you capture those 2 things, I promise you, you'll see that it makes it easier for you to move forward. It makes it easier for you to actually know better, which is, of course, what we are, moving towards, for you to be better and to know better.
Yeah, I love that. And I love reflecting on what you felt, especially if it wasn't necessarily a positive emotion, because it takes some of the fear of encountering that emotion in the future away, because you can look at
True.
it and say, oh, I felt extreme rage and this is how I reacted. Okay, what did
Yeah.
I learn? I learned that I could have responded like this. The situation might have resulted like that. And so
Yes.
on. So it, as you use the word empowering there, and I think that's exactly it. It does empower us when we reflect, because it helps us have the ability to respond in the future rather than react.
Exactly. And again, I think one thing that I just have to also add is that when we reflect, the most powerful thing is to understand that some other things are outside of our control. See, the most toxic thing about trauma and when it captures you in a cycle is that you constantly feel like you could have had, control over a certain situation. Let me rather make an example of something that we are all used to, a breakup. Like when you go through a breakup, it's the worst thing ever, right? But you find yourself thinking of ways in which you could have reacted and acted better, and you find yourself just thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking about this one particular thing, that, you know what, maybe I was supposed to say this to Thabo and he wasn't going to respond in this way. Maybe I was supposed to behave in this way and he was not going to end up doing this. But you need to then understand that some things are outside of our control, and acceptance is the biggest then thing that you need to do, especially when you want to move forward with your life and move on, is to accept that there are certain things that I just don't have control over. And me accepting that is power again, because it then makes you understand that there are certain things that are beyond my reach, that are beyond my control. and understanding, and also learning how to deal with things that are not under my control, it makes it's more empowering and it's more freeing. So I think, again, with trauma, it's one of those things that we definitely have to look at, to say that there are certain things that I don't have control over, and how someone else reacts to what I'm saying, I don't have control over that. I can only have control over my own emotions, specifically when I'm talking about relationships. The very same thing happens if when a traumatic event happens, whether it's going to be a death at home. We always want to feel responsible for such things, but we can't. We really can't. You would have thought of, probably I was supposed to drive my father, my uncle, whoever, to the hospital when he said that he's not feeling well or he has a headache, but I still thought that, okay, no, it's a normal headache and it'll go away. And then you start feeling like you feel trapped. Trauma, that's how trauma is. You feel like trapped. But you need to understand that there are certain things that you don't have control over. And there are certain other things that you just have to accept that they happened because they happened. And whether I was involved in that or whether I was not involved in that, events were going to happen the way that they unfolded. And I just have to accept that I just don't have control over everything. That one is very important.
Something that's just coming around in my head, you've used the word acceptance a lot, and it's also something that is so difficult to really process, especially when we've gone through something that's awful. And I just think that there's so much power in accepting things, because you said there's so much that happens in life that is beyond our control. And it's so important to focus on what we can control. And what we can control is our emotional response to a given situation. The situation's
True.
out of our control, but we can fully manage ourselves. And when we can reflect on things that have been perhaps negative in our life and really address them and grow from them and learn from them, then it gives us that feeling of empowerment to better present ourselves in those hard situations that will come around again in the future in different ways and
Exactly.
shapes. I kind of wanted to shift gears and focus a bit more in terms of how we can support others that are going through trauma. So we've spoken a lot about how we can use self-care and reflection and processing and accepting things that have happened to us. I think it's so difficult, or it can feel really difficult, when someone we love or care for is experiencing trauma, whether someone in their family has passed away, they've been through a bad breakup, they've lost their job, the list goes on. And I can't help but feel that a lot of people shy away from these conversations because they don't really want to lean into the heaviness of
Yeah.
them. Now, considering this is what you do all day, having calls with people to work with them on things that have caused them trauma in their life, I would think that you're somebody well equipped to offer advice to those of us who don't necessarily feel so equipped to hold those conversations. What would your advice be on creating space to have those tough conversations to support someone going through emotional or psychological trauma?
It's a very difficult one, especially when you are going to comfort a friend or comfort a loved one. The first thing that I just want to bring into awareness is that in many cases we want to sort of like, we want to be heroes, know what to say, know what to do. There's this expectation that we feel all the time, but sometimes that is not important. That's really, really not important. It's not for you to even understand what they're going through, because you'll never understand, and that's the total truth. I've spoken to a lot of people who have lost, their loved ones, and I haven't had that happen in my small circle where I lose a father, a mother, a sister. I've had a situation where I lost a friend, right? Now, when that happens, I can never, experience the pain the very same way that this person has experienced it. The first thing that I always say to loved ones is that understand that you won't understand their pain. So that's your first, your entry level in assisting and supporting them. Number two, remember your limits, right? Remember, your own limitations. It's very important for you to know that. Number three, that sensation of helplessness is actually the only thing that you need to comfort them. I'm not sure if you've ever been in a position whereby you sat next to someone and you just felt so helpless. You literally don't know what to do. You literally don't know what to say. That is your entry into actually supporting them, because it means that what they are going through, you are feeling. Sometimes that's why I said it's not even about understanding, because once we start to understand, we'll want to use logic to assist certain our friends. And when you start using logic, it's where you start saying to people, be strong, you got this, you'll get through this, because you're using logic because you want to understand them. But when you use feelings, it makes it more, it's more deeper. And that sense of helplessness, it's actually you can even open with that to say that, you know what, I don't understand what you're going through. I can never understand what you're feeling right now. I don't know. All I know is that I feel helpless right now with what you are going through. But what I know is that I'm going to be here for you. So when you want to talk to me, when you want someone to cry, a shoulder to cry on, I'll always be here. You see, now you're making this person to understand how the depth of their situation, number one. You are also saying to them, it's okay to feel this way because I feel this way too on your behalf. Empathy is so important. It's like really important. And immediately once we start feeling empathy, it draws us deeper because we feel what they feel. The pain that they're feeling, it's also with us. And that makes it easier for them to even talk to you. Remember, when someone is going through a traumatic, anything that is traumatic in their lives, the biggest thing is that they always feel like they're alone, right? And the loneliness is not precisely about not having people around them, but it's the feeling like they feel alone. And when you come in and you show empathy and you show that you're feeling, I can actually I can sense this feeling from you, and therefore that's why I am here. You make it easier for them to talk to you more than anything else. And I think that is why in many cases people that have lost certain people or that have lost loved ones are more in tune to actually talking to other people who have lost, right? But now I'm talking in a sense of, if I've never lost, empathy then becomes my guide, because when I feel the pain that my friend feels, when I cry with my friend, I'm literally saying to my friend, dude, look, I feel you, right? You don't have to feel shy about crying next to me, because when you cry, I feel the same way. The only thing that we need to do right now is that we just need to talk about this. And the more we talk about this, it's not that it becomes easier or the burden becomes easier, but the lighter you feel. It's all about you just taking it all out and taking it all out and taking it all out. So your support, especially if you've never went through the very same situation with that person, is to not understand. Because like I said, when you start understanding, you bring logic into the matter and you make them feel more alone. But when you start feeling what they're feeling, it makes it easier for them to actually, come to you and talk to you and say, you know what, I that's especially with counselors, that's how we are able to draw people to us and to talk to people, because we don't want to understand their pain, because we can never understand it. But I draw myself into that experience that they're having, so that I can be able to deal, or to help them to deal with this part of their lives, to move on swiftly. But talking then becomes a very therapeutic thing, for that person who's going through that traumatic experience. If you've ever helped a friend who went through a very bad breakup, you know that the more that your friend and you talk about this thing, you see your friend getting more lighter and lighter and lighter. As much as it is heavier sometimes, or the feeling is heavy, but they become lighter and lighter because you actually made them or gave them that space to talk. So it's also important that when we start, embarking on supporting our friends and loved ones, we give them the space to express themselves
Mm.
however they want to express themselves. Because when we start giving them that space to express themselves, they again get an opportunity to sort of like to talk about things that are in their minds. Remember that the trauma lives inside here. It's in your mind. It replays at least 100 times in a day. So when I get that opportunity to make my friend talk about whatever it is that is happening, I would literally allow them to talk as long as they want, because it's okay. And the minute that they talk about it, they are going to feel better. They are really going to feel better. Not that everything has changed and that, you know what, no. It's only about getting them to talk about it so that they can feel better. And when they start feeling better, then I can come in with other things that I can suggest to them to say that, hey, how about we start taking up a new hobby as friends? You know, something that can actually assist you in sort of like not sitting at home and thinking of one thing. How about, you know, you start journaling your emotions? Sometimes maybe you may find that it's difficult for you to talk to me. How about you journal your feelings? I think those things make them easier, or make it easier for such people who are going through traumatic experience to actually to be free around us, because we continuously give them support, not only with our ears, but we also give suggestive things that they can do in order to sort of like get a kickstart in their lives and to move swiftly, to move on swiftly.
I think you may have said it earlier that you said the first thing to do is feel, then heal, and then move on with your life. So,
Yes,
and
man.
that's exactly what you've just said. So feel it out, create space for people to share and just chat about whatever's on their mind, however it comes out, using empathy and compassion in the process, not judging what they say, not
Yeah,
feeling like you have to have an answer or solution, but just listening. And then healing, that's when we might suggest things that we think could propel them forward and get their minds into a more positive space and help them really work on themselves in other ways. So feel, heal, and then move forward with your life. So I guess
yes,
that third one is a consequence of doing the first two.
exactly.
I love that. I think that's really good. That's really good advice. I've just got a question. So there's so much work that we need to do on ourselves to create space for other people to express themselves. That's a whole
Uh-huh.
separate conversation. But I'm thinking of, imagine if I had a friend sitting next to me who'd just been through some traumatic experience, and I could be really well equipped to create and hold space to have a conversation with them. But perhaps they are really retracted into themselves. They're not opening up, they're not sharing, and they're just bottling it in. What kinds of things can we say to try and make them know that we are here, that we've created the space, and that we're ready for them to speak to us when they are ready?
Healing is a process on its own. You know, it's a huge and a long process on its own, especially when you suffered a lot. Especially when you've suffered a lot, there is a lot of blame that you're going to feel. You may find yourself having a lot of self-hate sometimes. There are other times when you feel like you would want to keep to yourself. So there's like a host of emotions that this person may feel all at the same time, right? And and in many cases, the feelings are somewhat, you know, accompanied by, you know, a feeling that I will never be okay, I will never be better, you know, this won't end, or this whatever. And when I am equipped, I need to also understand that as much as I want my friend to you know, to sort of like to open up to me, that whole part of opening up, it's a process on in itself, because someone can't open up to you when they've never opened up to themselves. Remember when I said it's important to have a relationship with yourself? Because when you start having a relationship with yourself, you make it easier to have relationships with other people, right? So when I start having a relationship with myself, meaning that when I start talking to me, I make it easier to talk to other people. Now, how do I talk to myself sometimes? If I think things and I think I'm talking to myself, actually, I am not. I'm just remunerating on things that have passed, and I'm not doing anything about it. You need to be active in your dialogue. You need to be active on your discussion, right? And one thing that you can actually do that is to write things down, right? Journaling your feelings, journaling your emotions. You'll see that once you start to do that, it is easier for you to actually open up to your friend, because you are going to know that, okay, this is what is weighing heavy on me. This is what is making me to behave like this. This is what is making me to react to such, to react in a particular way when certain things happen. So when you start having that dialogue, again, you need to continuously invite your friend into, a space whereby they feel comfortable, but they need to be comfortable with themselves first. And once they start being comfortable with themselves, it's only when they'll start talking to you. Remember, your one thing is to help your friend, but not to fix them. So we can have all the tools that we actually need, but those tools are not to fix our friends. They have to come into their own space, before they can actually get into a space whereby they can talk and really address the things that, or rather, feel like addressing these things with us. So until they do that, as a friend, you just have to keep yourself open, right? All the time open. And sometimes, like I said, being open is not only about, just saying, I'm giving up on this person. I've spoken to them 1,000 times. They still don't want to open up to me. You need to give them that space for them to actually come to you. If you've ever hunted, that's how, a lot of people do. When you hunt, you have to be so patient, right? Until that bird comes into, that trap that you put there, and then you just take out the whatever so that it can just, be trapped in there. That's how it goes, especially with people's emotions. But you're not trapping them. The only thing that you're doing, you're saying, dude, let's talk. Let's feel, and you'll be okay. But you just have to give them that space.
Yeah. I think something you said earlier, which just summarizes this for me, is that we need to deal with our emotions from an emotional point of view and not from a thinking point of view and a logical point of view. It's exactly so true. And I think we have so much work cut out for us in that front. There's so much need for us human beings to develop our emotional intelligence further, not only to manage our mental health, but just to generally build and maintain relationships in our personal lives, at work, and so on. So yeah, really what you've said, if I just had to summarize, that there's huge importance in developing deeper self-awareness. We can do that through journaling, chatting to people that we feel safe to fully express ourselves with. But that's the key part. We need to fully express whatever it is that we're feeling. And only once we've done that, we can come to understand perhaps the impact it's having on our lives, and then put practical, physical things in place to change that behavioral pattern that may have come up as a result. And thereafter, our healing journey can start.
There you go.
Amazing. Okay, it's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Thabo, for your time. I've really enjoyed just listening to you, and I certainly feel a bit more equipped to enter into these conversations with others, and hopefully to better look after myself when I go through traumatic experiences in the future. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this as well. This hour just flew past, honestly speaking. It really just flew past. But yeah, one thing I could just say in closing on my part is that just be kind to yourself, and really address yourself with a lot of patience. Some other things you're not going to get them today. Healing is a process, like I said. It may take you the next 10 years, depending on how you process things. So be kind to yourself. Know that it is your process, it is your journey, and just fall in love with yourself, and you'll see that certain other things that you face in your life, yes, they may trouble you, but they're not going to affect you to a point whereby you actually get to feel the need to even take your life. So be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself and your journey.
Thanks for listening to today's conversation. I think if I had to walk away with one thing today, it would be that healing from emotional trauma comes in 3 phases: feel, heal, and move on with your life. And the most important thing there is to first feel your emotions and express them fully, whether this means journaling, speaking to friends or family, or reaching out to professional help. Becoming more self-aware of some of the emotions and energy that you're storing within is one of the first steps taken to address our mental well-being. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and to share links with your friends and family. I'll see you next time.